Why was everyone staring at her? Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way she stood, motionless, steady, unbothered, while laughter rippled through the formation like static through an old radio. The morning sun had just begun to climb over the base, spilling gold light across the rows of recruits, 23 of them, boots polished to mirrors, faces a mixture of nerves and pride, and somewhere among them, barely visible behind taller frames, stood a girl who seemed carved from stillness itself. Sarah Chen, 5'2", 20 years old, brown eyes that didn't wander, didn't flinch, didn't answer anyone's curiosity. She simply existed there, small, quiet, unreadable, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment her whole life. A whisper slid through the line behind her. "Look at her," someone muttered, a broad-shouldered recruit from Texas. "She looks like she'd blow away in a strong wind." Soft laughter followed. Not cruel, not yet, just the nervous kind, the laughter of young men trying to find comfort in comparison. Sarah didn't move, didn't react, didn't even blink. She had arrived 3 days earlier, carrying a single duffel bag and an expression that told the world nothing. While the other recruits swapped stories about home, bragged about old sports trophies, compared scars, Sarah said little more than "yes, Sergeant," and "no, sir." She ate alone, slept lightly, spoke to no one unless she had to. And in a place where camaraderie meant survival, that silence made her a mystery people didn't know how to handle. "Some recruits," Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was saying, packing like a predator in front of them, "think they understand tough. You don't, not yet." His voice carried that peculiar mix of menace and inspiration that only career soldiers could perfect. 2 decades in uniform had carved him into a man who could smell weakness and courage alike. When his gaze passed over Sarah, something flickered, not doubt, not sympathy, recognition. He said nothing, just moved on. He talked about endurance, about teamwork, about stripping away ego until all that remained was discipline. Sarah listened, unmoving, while the others shifted under the weight of his words. When he began assigning groups, people quietly hoped they wouldn't get stuck with her. The quiet girl, the strange one, the one whose silence made them feel loud in all the wrong ways. "Chen Sarah," Rodriguez barked, "Group Alpha." A small ripple of laughter ran through the ranks. Marcus, the Texan with shoulders like an oak door, exhaled dramatically. "Great," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We got the silent treatment girl." The others in Group Alpha grinned uneasily. Jake, 6'4", all limbs and charm. Tommy, the Chicago brawler with fists that never quite unclenched. David, the soldier's son who'd memorized every tactic book he could find. Lewis, the joker, all nerves and jokes to hide them. And Kevin, quiet, kind, country-strong. They were 6 strangers told to become one heartbeat. And now one of them was a girl who hadn't smiled since arrival. That night in the mess hall, they gathered around a metal table, their trays steaming with identical portions of overcooked chicken and instant potatoes. Sarah sat at the end, alone but within reach. Marcus leaned forward, his voice full of mock curiosity. "So Chen, where you from? What made you sign up?" Her answer was simple. "Cal." He frowned. "Cal, California." Sarah nodded once, eating calmly. Tommy chuckled. "You're gonna have to give us more than that. You work, go to college." "I worked." "Doing what?" Lewis asked. Sarah chewed, swallowed, then looked up for the first time. "Different things." Marcus threw up his hands. "We're supposed to be a team. Teams talk, you know." No reaction, just that same steady gaze. Then softly, "I'll communicate when it matters." It silenced the table. Even Marcus couldn't think of a comeback. Kevin finally cleared his throat. "Well, we'll find out tomorrow. Rodriguez said we start hand-to-hand combat at dawn." The word combat changed the air. Marcus grinned. "Perfect. Guess we'll see if she can keep up." Sarah finished her meal, rose, and left the table without a word. They watched her walk away, small, quiet, unhurried, and something about that composure unsettled them more than any insult could. "Problem," Marcus muttered. "That girl's gonna be a problem." The morning whistle screamed at 5:30. Most recruits groaned and fumbled for boots. Sarah was already dressed, laces tied, hair pulled tight, eyes clear. She'd been awake long before the whistle. Sleep was a habit she'd learned to ration, a luxury, not a necessity. Outside, mist clung to the field as Group Alpha assembled. Rodriguez led them toward the combat training facility, a cavern of mats, punching bags, and the sharp scent of sweat and bleach. "Hand to hand," he announced. "When your weapon jams, when your ammo's gone, when luck runs out, this is what keeps you alive." 6 recruits nodded, one simply listened. He called her forward, chin, front and center. She moved without hesitation, smooth, deliberate. Every motion contained, economical, like someone who'd practiced precision more times than she'd taken breaths. Rodriguez demonstrated stances, guards, balance points. She mirrored him perfectly. No hesitation, no adjustment. Marcus whispered, "This'll be painful." Tommy snickered, "She'll last 30 seconds." Rodriguez ignored them. "Pair up, practice defensive drills, Marcus with Chen." Marcus grinned like a man given a gift. He stepped onto the mat, towering over her. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll go easy on you." Sarah said nothing. Rodriguez gave the signal. Marcus threw a lazy punch, half-speed, telegraphed, almost playful. The kind of move meant to prove dominance, not skill. Sarah moved, a simple sidestep, a brush of his arm, and he hit air. She returned to stance before he even realized he'd missed. Marcus blinked, lucky shot. He tried again, harder, another swing. She ducked under it, pivoted, reset. Now the others had stopped practicing. Something about her movements drew the eye, the economy of it, the calm. Time switch roles. Marcus prepared to defend. Let's see what the little ghosts got. Sarah's first strike was measured, a palm thrust to the chest, textbook form. He barely bothered to block. The impact jolted him backward a full step. His forearm tingled like it had struck a live wire. "What the?" "Language, recruit," Rodriguez cut in. Marcus scowled, resettling his stance. Then Sarah moved again. Not hard, not fast, just right. A rhythm that made sense only when you saw it, like a melody of motion. Every strike precise, balanced, flowing into the next. Marcus blocked 1, 2, 3, then lost count. He was breathing heavy now, sweat on his forehead. The others watched in silent disbelief. 30 seconds later, Rodriguez called time. "Silence." Marcus straightened, chest heaving, and stared at her. The girl hadn't even broken a sweat. "How'd you do that?" Jake asked. Sarah looked at him, expression unchanged. "Practice." "What kind of practice?" David asked. "Different places." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Chen, what's your martial arts background?" "Some training." "Some?" Marcus barked, incredulous. "That wasn't some, that was a ghost fight." Rodriguez didn't smile, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed respect. "Tommy, step up." One by one she faced them all. Tommy's boxing footwork couldn't find her. David's wrestling grips caught air. Lewis's speed meant nothing. Kevin's strength never landed. When it was over, 5 men stood breathing hard, confused, humbled. The girl in front of them looked exactly as she had at the start, calm, controlled, almost serene. Rodriguez dismissed them. No lecture this time, just a quiet, knowing look toward Sarah. By lunch, the story had spread like wildfire. The small, silent girl from Group Alpha had taken down 5 men without a scratch. Recruits from other groups pointed discreetly as she entered the dining hall. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. She fought them all, didn't even blink. Special forces, maybe. At her table, Marcus sat poking at his food. His pride hurt more than his muscles. She made me look like I never fought before, he muttered. That wasn't fighting, that was art. Across the room, Sarah ate quietly, alone, unaware, or maybe perfectly aware of the storm she'd created. Rodriguez joined her. No bark, no scowl, just a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. That was impressive, he said. I followed instructions, Sergeant. He studied her, searching for ego, found none. Where did you learn to fight like that? Various instructors. He almost smiled. Your teammates are adjusting, especially Marcus. They'll figure it out. You sound sure. They joined for the right reasons. That matters more than ego. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Maybe you'll be the one to teach them that. That afternoon, they moved to the obstacle course. Heat shimmered off the metal rails, dust rising in golden clouds. Marcus went first, throwing himself at the course with brute force and stubborn pride. He muscled through every challenge, finishing red-faced but determined. Then Sarah stepped to the line. Rodriguez's whistle cut through the air, and she was gone. Not fast, not frantic, just fluid. Her movements looked like water finding the easiest path downhill. No wasted energy, no hesitation. When she crossed the finish line, the stopwatch said she'd beaten the best time by 30 seconds. Silence again. Then Marcus exhaled, half laugh, half groan. What can't she do? Later, when they ran it again as a team, Sarah spoke for the first time during an exercise. Calm, focused, direct. She assigned roles, who should lead where, who should cover whom, and the others almost instinctively followed her voice. For the first time, Group Alpha moved as one. When they crossed the line together, Rodriguez raised a brow. Second best team time this year. 6 strangers, breathing hard, smiling despite themselves. Walking back to the barracks, Marcus fell in step beside her. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I judged you wrong. Sarah's gaze stayed forward. Most people do. Is that why you don't talk much? She thought for a moment. Talking doesn't change what people see. Actions do. He nodded, understanding more in that one sentence than any lecture could teach. As the day faded into dusk, laughter echoed faintly from the barracks. Group Alpha, 6 voices, 1 rhythm. And at its center, still quiet, still calm, stood the girl no one had understood. They didn't know yet what she carried, or how far that silence reached. But Rodriguez did. He watched her from the distance and thought, there's something she hasn't told them. Not yet. And in the cooling light of evening, Sarah Chen sat by the window of her bunk, listening to the low hum of laughter below, the soft rustle of uniforms and boots and dreams. For the first time, she almost smiled. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of a storm holding its breath. The next morning didn't begin with sound. It began with stillness, the kind that lives between heartbeats when the world hasn't decided whether it's calm or dangerous. Sarah was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk. Her boots were laced, her uniform crisp, her hair pulled tight in a perfect regulation knot. Through the small window beside her bed, the first hint of dawn crept across the base. She'd always loved that hour before the noise, before the orders. It was when the quiet felt honest. Outside, the whistle shattered it. Recruits groaned. Metal lockers slammed. But Sarah was already on her feet, stepping out into the chilled morning air before most had even rubbed the sleep from their eyes. Group Alpha assembled in their line, yawns disguised as stretches, nerves hidden behind chatter. Marcus tried a grin. Morning team, ready to get humbled again. Tommy smirked. Depends, are we fighting her or training with her? Sarah said nothing, eyes forward. Rodriguez appeared with his usual thundercloud authority. Today, he announced, we see how much you remember from yesterday. Defensive drills are one thing, endurance under pressure, that's another. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. The ache from yesterday's combat session hadn't faded, especially for Marcus and Tommy. Inside the training hall, the air smelled of leather, sweat, and disinfectant. Rodriguez's voice echoed off the concrete walls. You'll rotate stations, close-quarter defense, ground combat, controlled sparring. I expect precision, not chaos. The recruits spread out, forming pairs. Sarah ended up opposite Lewis, whose grin barely hid his fear. Go easy on me, all right, he whispered. Her eyes softened, the faintest trace of humor. Always. The whistle blew. For 15 minutes, the hall filled with the sound of bodies hitting mats and the staccato rhythm of discipline meeting exhaustion. Sarah's movements were calm, deliberate. Every strike measured, every counter purposeful. She never overpowered. She simply guided her opponents into mistakes until they realized strength wasn't enough. When the whistle finally cut through the noise, Rodriguez barked, "Form up." They stood in 2 neat rows, dripping sweat, breathing hard. All except Sarah, her breathing barely changed, as if she'd been meditating rather than fighting. Rodriguez paced between them. Some of you are learning what discipline feels like. Some of you are learning humility. His gaze flicked toward Marcus for a heartbeat, then back to the line. Good, you'll need both. The next session came after lunch. The obstacle course again, this time as a team event. The memory of Sarah's flawless solo run hung in the air like a challenge none of them wanted to mention. Rodriguez laid out the rules. You move as one, you finish as one, leave no one behind or you fail as a unit. The whistle shrieked. They ran. The sun glared down, bouncing off metal and sweat. Dust rose beneath their boots as the 6 recruits hit the first obstacle, a wall taller than most of them. Marcus threw himself at it, muscles straining, fingers catching the top edge. He pulled, slipped, tried again. Sarah was beside him before he could fall back, pushing upward with surprising force. He caught the top, swung a leg over, then turned in disbelief. She had already moved to help the next person. She didn't lead with commands. She led with instinct. Every time one of them faltered, she was there, not shouting, not showing off, just present. By the final obstacle, their rhythm had changed. It wasn't 6 recruits anymore. It was one organism, lungs, limbs, and grit working in unison. When Rodriguez blew his final whistle, his stopwatch blinked an impossible time. Second best of the year, he said, and you're not even halfway through training. The team exchanged exhausted smiles. For the first time since arriving, Marcus's grin wasn't arrogant. It was grateful. That evening in the mess hall, the air hummed differently. They sat together now, no empty space at the end of the table. Sarah ate quietly, but she wasn't alone anymore. Marcus set down his fork. I gotta ask, Chen, who taught you that stuff? Nobody moves like that without serious training. Sarah finished chewing before she spoke. My grandfather. Was he military? She hesitated, eyes on her tray. Something like that. Lewis leaned forward. Come on, you can't just say something like that. The man teach you to fight blindfolded or what? A faint smile ghosted across her face. He taught me to listen, said the body tells the truth before the mouth does. They laughed quietly, but no one pushed further. Something in her tone carried weight, like every word had been filtered through loss before it reached her lips. Later, as they returned to the barracks, Marcus walked beside her. I meant what I said earlier. I was wrong about you. I know. Doesn't bother you, people judging you like that. Sarah glanced up at the fatting sky. People always judge. It's what they do after that matters. For the first time, Marcus didn't have a comeback. Over the next few weeks, Group Alpha transformed. What had begun as 6 strangers slowly turned into something closer to family. They trained harder, laughed louder, fought less. Sarah spoke more, never about herself, but about endurance, about awareness, about learning when not to fight. Sometimes at night, when the barracks went dark, Marcus or Kevin would hear her moving, silent exercises, breath work, stretches that looked more like meditation than military routine. None of them interrupted. It felt sacred somehow. 3 weeks later, the transformation was impossible to ignore. Group Alpha topped every chart: endurance, teamwork, strategy. Rodriguez watched from a distance, pretending to scowl but secretly proud. That pride turned to curiosity one evening when an order came down from above. He entered the common room where the team sat, mid-conversation, half smiling from the kind of easy camaraderie forged through shared struggle. "Group Alpha," he said, voice steady but charged. "Briefing room 3, 10 minutes, full gear, combat ready." The room froze, combat ready at night. Sarah's head lifted first. Her eyes met his, calm, unreadable. She knew something the others didn't. 10 minutes later, they stood in a briefing room that smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. Two unfamiliar men waited beside Rodriguez. Their uniforms were darker, their posture sharper: special operations instructors. Rodriguez introduced them. Staff Sergeant Williams, Sergeant First Class Martinez. Williams stepped forward, voice rough and direct. "You've been selected for an advanced training exercise. Hostage rescue scenario, 2-mile insertion, urban terrain, opposing force, 6 Marines." The room went dead silent. Tommy blinked. 6 Marines, like real Marines. Martinez nodded. "Experienced, disciplined, and heavily armed. You'll have simulated rounds and laser trackers. They'll have the same. Expect to lose." Kevin exhaled. "We're recruits, sir. No offense, but isn't this impossible?" Martinez's lips twitched. "That's the point." Rodriguez's gaze swept over them. "This test isn't about victory. It's about pressure. How you think, how you move, how you fail together. Understood?" They all answered, some louder than others. Sarah, "Yes, sir," was the quietest, and somehow the most certain. After the instructors left, the room filled with restless energy. Maps lay spread across the table, showing a compound of 3 connected buildings. Windows, doorways, kill zones. Marcus leaned over the map. 6 Marines, fortified position. We rush in, they mow us down. We sneak, they spot us anyway. What are we even supposed to do?" Sarah had been silent, eyes fixed on the map, tracing invisible lines with her gaze. Finally she spoke. "They're expecting recruits. Let's not act like recruits." Jake frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning they'll plan for predictable behavior. Straightforward approach, bad coordination, panic. We give them the opposite." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "And what's the opposite?" "Discipline, deception, silence." They stared at her. She leaned over the map and began outlining a plan, subtle, layered, impossible to predict. Marcus watched her hands move across the paper, precise and confident. "Where'd you learn this stuff?" he asked. Sarah didn't look up. "Chess." "Chess." "My grandfather said the best way to win is to make your opponent think they know the game you're playing." The room went quiet again. Over the next 30 minutes, she assigned roles. Marcus, power and cover fire. Tommy and Lewis, distraction unit. David, strategy and comms. Kevin, precision marksman. Jake, secondary lead with her. When she finished, the plan looked like chaos written in code, but every piece connected, every risk balanced by instinct. As they prepared their gear, Lewis whispered to Marcus, "She's either a genius or crazy." Marcus smiled faintly. "Both maybe, but I trust her." Outside, night had settled over the base. The moon was thin, the air heavy with the scent of dust and anticipation. They moved through darkness, 6 shadows heading toward the unknown. Sarah walked ahead, scanning the terrain. Her body language had changed. Not nervous, not eager, ready. Like someone returning to a language they hadn't spoken in years but still knew fluently. Jake noticed it too. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he whispered. She didn't answer, just looked at him and said, "Trust me." When they reached the observation point overlooking the compound, Sarah crouched low. Floodlights cast long arcs of glare across the open ground. Figures moved inside the perimeter, Marines, alert and confident. She pointed toward the far east building. "Tommy, Lewis, you make noise there. Don't get caught, just get seen. They'll shift focus." Tommy swallowed. "That's suicide." "Not if you move when I say." Her tone carried authority none of them had heard before. Even Marcus, who never took orders easily, found himself listening without hesitation. She turned to Jake. "You and me guards on the perimeter, quietly." "Quietly," Jake repeated, though he wasn't sure what she meant by it yet. As the timer on her wrist reached 0, Sarah whispered into the radio, "Execute." Two shadows peeled away toward the eastern flank. Within seconds, distant shouts erupted, simulated gunfire, flashlights cutting through the dark. "Contact east," a Marine's voice called. Sarah's eyes flicked toward Jake. Phase 2. They moved. Her steps were barely sound, not stealth, but invisibility. She flowed through darkness as if she'd trained with shadows themselves. Jake followed, every movement exaggerated and clumsy by comparison. Ahead, the first Marine stood at his post, scanning through night vision goggles. His weapon tracked arcs across the landscape. Sarah whispered, "Stay behind me. 10 feet, don't speak." Before Jake could nod, she was gone. He blinked, she'd melted into the darkness. 30 seconds later, the Marine stiffened, startled by something he didn't have time to name. His sensors blinked red, simulated elimination. "Clear," she murmured, reappearing beside Jake like she'd materialized out of air. Jake's heart hammered. "How did you?" She raised a finger to her lips. They moved again. When the second guard fell, Jake finally understood what Rodriguez had seen that first day, not just skill, but something deeper. Training carved from years of discipline, patience, and silence. By the time the radio crackled, hostages secure, 0 casualties, Group Alpha stood victorious. For a long moment no one spoke. Then through the comm, Staff Sergeant Williams's voice came, almost awed. "Exercise complete. All units return to base." Jake looked at Sarah as they emerged from the shadows. "They're gonna ask questions after this." Sarah's answer was quiet. "They always do." As the team regrouped, the Marines who'd played the opposition approached, removing helmets, eyes wide with respect. "That was the cleanest op I've seen in years," their leader said. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Sarah's gaze was calm, unreadable. "My grandfather taught me that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make sure your enemy never realizes they're in one." They stared, unsure whether it was humility or warning, maybe both. Walking back to base, the first hint of dawn colored the horizon. The team laughed quietly, the kind of laughter born from disbelief and pride. Jake fell into step beside her. "You could have told us who you really are." Sarah kept her eyes forward. "Would you have believed me?" "Probably not." "Then it's better this way." The silence between them wasn't awkward now. It was respect. Behind them, the base lights glowed faintly against the fading night. Ahead, questions waited, the kind that didn't have easy answers. Sarah Chen walked toward them calmly, already knowing that what came next would test not her body, but her truth. Sometimes silence doesn't hide weakness. Sometimes it hides history. The next morning didn't bring applause. It brought silence, that heavy, loaded kind that lives between rumor and truth. When Group Alpha assembled at dawn, the air around them felt different. Other recruits glanced their way, whispering under their breath. It wasn't the usual curiosity anymore. It was something closer to disbelief, fear, even. Word had already spread. 6 recruits, barely out of basic, had just outmaneuvered 6 seasoned Marines. And at the center of it all, a 5'2" girl who moved like smoke and struck like thunder. Rodriguez stood before them, unreadable. His jaw was set tighter than usual. "Fall in," he barked, but the edge in his voice wasn't anger. It was caution. As Sarah took her place in line, she could feel it, the stares, the weight of it all pressing down like invisible hands. She had tried to stay invisible. Now, invisibility had turned into legend overnight. Marcus leaned close enough for his whisper to reach her. "You know half the base thinks you're CIA now, right?" She didn't look at him. "Let them think." "Yeah, but who are you really?" Her eyes didn't move. "A recruit, same as you." Rodriguez's gaze swept over them one last time before he gave the command. "Dismissed. Chen, stay behind." The others hesitated. Marcus glanced back, but one sharp look from Rodriguez sent him moving. The door closed, leaving Sarah alone with the sergeant. He didn't speak at first, just circled the room slowly, hands behind his back, boots echoing against concrete. When he finally stopped, he turned toward her, not as a drill sergeant now, but as a man trying to understand something that didn't make sense. "I've seen recruits with talent," he said quietly. "Natural fighters, born athletes, but what I saw last night wasn't talent, it was something else." Sarah said nothing. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "I've trained special forces, rangers. I know advanced technique when I see it. Where did you learn that level of discipline?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "My grandfather taught me." He crossed his arms. "Your grandfather must have been one hell of a teacher." She nodded once. "He was." "Military." Her pause said more than any answer could. "Something like that," she said at last. Rodriguez studied her face, the calm, the control, the way she never offered more than she needed to. Finally, he sighed. "Whatever your story is, Chen, keep your head down. You've drawn attention you don't want, and attention in this place can be dangerous." He dismissed her with a nod, but his warning lingered long after she left the room. By lunchtime, the base was buzzing. Conversation stopped when Sarah entered the mess hall. Some recruits tried to act casual, others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. "She's special ops," one whispered. "No way, she's a test plant. They put her here to spy on us." "My cousin said there's a secret program for recruits like her." Sarah ignored them all. She collected her food and found her usual corner, sitting in silence as always. But this time, her team joined her without hesitation. Marcus dropped his tray beside hers. "We're not letting you eat alone anymore. Deal with it." Lewis grinned. "Besides, if the secret agents come to take you away, we're going too." Jake smirked. "For moral support, and because you might actually kill them." A flicker of warmth crossed her face, a smile so faint it could have been imagined. But when Rodriguez entered the hall, the atmosphere shifted again. He walked directly toward their table, eyes fixed on Sarah. "Chen," he said, "with me." The others froze. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez didn't answer. "Now recruit." Sarah stood, tray untouched. She followed him out into the hallway, the sound of her boots echoing through the sterile corridors until they stopped at a door she hadn't entered before, the base commander's office. When Rodriguez opened it, 3 people were waiting inside. Colonel Harrison, 2 civilians in dark suits, and a woman in uniform with the insignia of Special Operations Command. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy with authority and suspicion. "Recruit Chen," the colonel began, formal but not unkind. "Please have a seat." She remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." The older of the 2 civilians stepped forward. "I'm Agent Morrison, Department of Defense. This is Agent Kim and Major Rodriguez, Special Operations Command." Different Rodriguez, higher rank, sharper eyes. Morrison adjusted his glasses. "We've reviewed last night's exercise. Your team achieved a result that, frankly, shouldn't have been possible. 6 Marines neutralized in under 4 minutes, 0 casualties, flawless coordination. Except..." He tapped a folder on the desk. "All tactical decisions, positioning, and execution patterns trace back to you." Sarah stayed silent. Morrison studied her. Those movement patterns aren't standard military training. They match recorded data from several classified special operations programs. Programs you shouldn't even know exist. Colonel Harrison shifted uncomfortably. Agents, I must remind you, Recruit Chen is under my command and has followed every regulation. Colonel, Morrison interrupted, we're not accusing her of misconduct. We're investigating how someone with no prior record could possess such training. He opened a tablet, showing images from the simulation, infrared stills of Sarah moving through shadows, striking targets with surgical precision. This isn't instinct, it's education. Sarah's voice was calm. I followed the plan I designed. The team executed it well. Agent Kim leaned forward. Where did you learn to move like that? My grandfather taught me. Your enlistment record says he was a mechanic. He was. Morrison's tone hardened. Don't insult our intelligence, recruit. You demonstrated hand-to-hand techniques used in special forces schools that haven't existed since the late 1980s. How does a civilian mechanic teach that? Sarah looked directly at him, because he wasn't always a mechanic. The room went still. Colonel Harrison frowned. Explain. Sarah hesitated, then made a decision. His name wasn't Chen Ming, not originally. Morrison's eyes flicked up. Go on. His real name was Master Sergeant Wei Ming Chen, United States Army Special Forces, 3 tour in Vietnam, Phoenix program. A chill spread through the room. The colonel looked at the agents. Phoenix. Major Rodriguez answered quietly. Counterinsurgency, deep cover operations, half of it still classified. Morrison's voice was lower now. You're telling us your grandfather served in one of the most secret units in military history, and no record exists. Sarah nodded. He was relocated after the war. New name, new life. He said some things were easier to protect when people thought they never existed. Agent Kim began typing rapidly on her tablet. If what you're saying is true, your grandfather would have been part of operations that trained in unconventional warfare, infiltration, and psychological combat. Sarah's eyes softened for the first time since entering the room. He trained me in all of it, not because he wanted me to fight, but because he wanted me to understand what fighting costs. The agents exchanged glances. Colonel Harrison broke the silence. Why now? Why join the military at all? Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, where the faint reflection of her team outside could be seen, 5 recruits standing in formation, refusing to leave. Because he told me one day the world would need people who could do what he taught me, and when that day came, I shouldn't hide from it. Morrison's expression softened, though his tone stayed professional. Do you have any proof of these claims? Sarah reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased, worn, protected by years of careful keeping. He said if this day ever came, give these numbers and code words to whoever asked. Morrison unfolded it, reading the numbers aloud in silence. His face changed mid-sentence, the slight tightening of eyes that happens when a secret touches something real. I recognize some of these area codes. He stepped aside, phone already in hand. For the next few minutes, the room filled with the quiet murmur of coded phrases, cross-verifications, and the kind of language that only existed behind locked doors. When he finally ended the last call, his entire demeanor had shifted. Confirmed, he said quietly, every word. Colonel Harrison looked at Sarah with something between pride and awe. So your grandfather trained you off the record? Yes, sir. And you still chose to enlist as a regular recruit? Yes, sir. Because if I didn't start at the bottom, I'd never understand the people I'd be asked to lead. The colonel nodded slowly, respect settling in his eyes. Morrison closed the folder. Recruit Chen, you're cleared. Your grandfather's file has been officially verified. His service record and the training you received were part of a contingency program declassified only to a handful of us. He paused, voice softening. He wanted you to choose your own path. Consider that choice honored. Sarah exhaled, not relief exactly, but release. May I return to my unit, sir? Colonel Harrison smiled faintly. Yes, recruit. I think they've been waiting long enough. When she stepped outside, the sunlight struck her face like a benediction. Group Alpha stood in perfect formation, 6 figures against the backdrop of the base, their expressions a mix of defiance and loyalty. Marcus took a step forward. We don't care what those suits said. You're one of us. Sarah looked at them, each face etched with the kind of camaraderie no briefing could order into existence. Thank you, she said softly. Lewis grinned. So not CIA, huh? Not exactly. Special Forces bloodline. Something like that. Laughter broke through the tension. For a moment, it felt like the storm had passed. But as they walked back toward the training grounds, Sarah couldn't shake the echo of her grandfather's voice in her head, a memory carried through years of whispered lessons. Strength isn't silence, little sparrow. It's what you choose to protect when no one's listening. She kept her silence long enough. Now the world was listening and watching. As dusk settled over the base, Sarah sat on the steps outside the barracks, boots unlaced, the day's weight pressing softly against her shoulders. Marcus joined her, arms resting on his knees. You could have joined Special Forces directly, he said. With that training, they'd have taken you in a heartbeat. I didn't want a shortcut, she said. I wanted a team. He nodded slowly, looking out at the fading horizon. Guess you got one now. For a while they just sat there, soldier and storm, silence and understanding. Then Sarah said quietly, my grandfather used to say the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. Marcus smiled. Then the world's about to hear yours. In the distance, floodlights hummed to life, painting the training grounds in silver. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new challenges, new eyes watching her every move. But for the first time since stepping on this base, Sarah Chen didn't feel alone in her silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands. And sometimes it takes down 6 Marines without breaking a sweat. The base felt quieter after the storm, but it wasn't really quiet. It was the kind of stillness that comes after a gunshot, not peace, just the echo of what's been changed. 3 days had passed since Sarah Chen walked out of Colonel Harrison's office. 3 days since government agents confirmed what everyone had been whispering. And yet, no one seemed to know what to do with the truth. The official story spread fast, but not the real one. The officers said she'd been cleared of all inquiries. The recruits said she was connected. The instructors said nothing at all. But everyone felt it. Something about Sarah had shifted. When she walked through the halls, conversations paused. Some saluted her, not out of regulation, but respect. Others watched from a distance, whispering her name like it carried both curiosity and warning. Even her teammates were different now. Not colder, not scared, just watchful. Like they were trying to understand who she'd been before she became the story. That morning, Group Alpha gathered for weapons training. Rodriguez stood in front of them, clipboard in hand, but his usual bark was gone. He regarded Sarah with quiet calculation before addressing the group. Chen, he said, front of the line. She stepped forward. We're running a new course today, live fire simulation, speed and accuracy. Everyone will go through it individually. He hesitated for just a second, as if deciding whether to say what he wanted to say. You'll start us off. Sarah nodded, slinging the training rifle over her shoulder. The field stretched ahead, metal targets, obstacles, tight corners built for split-second decision-making. A test of focus more than firepower. Rodriguez blew the whistle. Sarah moved. Her footsteps barely crunched against the gravel. The rifle shifted seamlessly from target to target. Pop, pop, pop. Each hit landed center mass. Each reload was instinctive. When she dropped to a knee behind cover, her breath came slow, measured. The kind of control born from repetition, not performance, not nerves. By the time she crossed the finish line, the timer stopped at a number that made Rodriguez blink twice before saying anything. 38 seconds, he announced. Previous record 47. No one clapped, they just stared. Then Marcus laughed under his breath. Of course she did. The others joined in, tension cracking like glass. Even Rodriguez allowed himself a rare half-smile. As Sarah lowered her rifle, Marcus called out, "You gonna teach us that trick or keep it classified?" She turned, offering him the ghost of a smile. "Breathe, don't blink, don't think." He laughed, "Easy for you to say." When it was Marcus's turn, he attacked the course with his usual brute force, loud, fast, full of energy. He hit decent scores, but his grin afterward was pure pride, not competition. "Not bad," she said. "Not Sarah Chen numbers," he admitted, "but not bad." The team moved through their rounds one by one, and for the first time since the incident, things almost felt normal again. Almost. Later that evening, Sarah found herself summoned once more, not to the commander's office this time, but to a small building near the far end of the base. The kind of building people walked past without noticing, but everyone somehow knew to respect. Inside waited Major Rodriguez, the one from Special Operations Command. Her presence was enough to change the air of any room. "Recruit Chen," she said, "sit." Sarah did. The major studied her in silence for a long moment. "Do you know how many calls I've taken about you in the last 72 hours? "No, ma'am." "Dozens. Commanders, analysts, recruiters. Everyone wants to know what to do with you." "I'm already doing what I came here to do," Sarah said evenly. The major smiled faintly. "Yes, but people like you don't stay hidden for long. You've demonstrated field instincts that match top-tier special operators without formal training. That kind of ability gets noticed." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't enlist to skip steps." "That's not what this is about." The major leaned forward slightly. "It's about where you can do the most good. Special Operations Command is considering inviting you into a specialized mentorship program, a track designed for recruits with exceptional aptitude." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "And if I refuse?" "Then you finish basic, same as everyone else. But the moment you graduate, your name goes on a list that people don't forget." Sarah nodded slowly, understood. The major's voice softened. "Don't misunderstand me, Chen. What you've done here, the discipline, the control, it's admirable. But it's also a burden. You carry training that wasn't meant for ordinary service. You'll have to decide what kind of soldier you want to be." Sarah met her gaze, the kind that doesn't forget why she joined. The major studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Then finish what you started." When Sarah stepped back into the cool night air, she paused just outside the door, the wind brushing against her uniform. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes. "What kind of soldier do you want to be?" Her grandfather's voice echoed faintly in her memory, the kind who serves without needing to be seen. Back at the barracks, the team was still awake, sprawled across bunks, trading stories, arguing over who'd gotten the best shooting score. When Sarah entered, all heads turned. Lewis sat up immediately. "Well, what did the brass want this time?" Sarah unbuttoned her jacket calmly. "A conversation." Tommy groaned. "That's it, come on, that's not an answer." "It's the one I have." Marcus grinned. "You're impossible, you know that." "I've been told." The laughter that followed felt real, easier than before. But Jake, ever observant, didn't laugh. He watched her carefully. "They offered you something, didn't they?" Sarah didn't look up. "Maybe." "And you're not taking it?" Not yet. He nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. Later, when the others had drifted into sleep, Sarah sat on the floor beside her bunk, knees drawn close, a small photograph resting in her hands, her grandfather, in an old, faded uniform, smiling beside a younger version of her. The edges were frayed, the ink faded, but the memory was sharp as ever. "You'd hate this attention," she whispered to the picture. "You always said to move quietly, to leave no footprints." The photo didn't answer, but in her mind she could hear him, calm, steady, amused. Sometimes, to protect silence, you have to make noise first. The next few weeks blurred into rhythm. Training, endurance, drills. And through it all, Group Alpha continued to rise, not just in rank but in unity. They'd become a machine, not perfect but synchronized. Where Marcus was brute strength, Sarah was balance. Where Lewis cracked jokes, David strategized. Tommy and Kevin handled the grind, Jake held them together. Rodriguez watched them with something close to pride. One morning, during a long-distance endurance run, he fell into pace beside Sarah. "You're changing them," he said quietly. "They're changing themselves," she replied. He nodded. "Maybe, but they wouldn't be this without you." Sarah glanced ahead to where Marcus and Tommy were arguing good-naturedly about who'd run faster. "They don't need me," she said softly. "They just needed to trust themselves." Rodriguez looked at her, really looked at her. "You ever think about leadership, Chen?" "I think about responsibility." "Same thing when it's done right." Her silence said she wasn't so sure. By the end of the 8th week, the team had broken nearly every record at the base. It didn't matter anymore whether the other recruits liked them or not. Everyone respected them. Evenings were calmer now. Laughter carried through the barracks. Jokes replaced whispers. But beneath it all, a quiet pressure grew, the sense that something larger was coming. One night Marcus found Sarah outside again, sitting beneath the dim floodlights near the edge of the training field. She was cleaning her rifle, slow and methodical, as always. He sat beside her, wordless for a long time. Finally, he said, "You know they're gonna move you up after this, right?" "Maybe. You'll take it." She didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, tugging at the loose strands of her hair. "I don't know," she said finally. "I wanted to learn what it means to serve with people, not above them." Marcus looked at her, then nodded. "Whatever happens next, we've got your back." She looked at him, really looked, and something in her eyes softened. "I know." The night stretched quiet again, the kind of silence that carried more comfort than conversation. Somewhere beyond the training grounds, floodlights flickered out, one by one, until the base settled into the still rhythm of midnight. Sarah sat there long after Marcus had gone back inside, her gaze fixed on the stars barely visible through the faint haze of dust and distance. She thought of her grandfather again, the way he'd say, "A warrior isn't someone who loves the fight, it's someone who hates it enough to end it quickly." She didn't know what kind of soldier she was becoming, or whether she even wanted to be the kind they were trying to make her. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done learning what silence could teach. And somewhere deep inside she could feel it, a shift in the horizon, subtle but sure. Something was coming, a test she hadn't trained for. And when it came, it wouldn't just measure her strength. It would measure her soul. The morning started like any other, uniforms, inspection, drills, but something in the air felt off. Too quiet. Too steady. Sarah sensed it before anyone said a word. The way Rodriguez's shoulders were tighter, the way radios hissed more than usual, the way the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. By noon, rumors spread faster than commands. A convoy on a nearby test route, civilian contractors and soldiers, had gone dark, lost comms, no GPS ping, just gone. Rodriguez appeared in the mess hall doorway. "Group Alpha, gear up, now." The entire hall froze. Marcus looked up from his tray. "We're being deployed." Rodriguez's jaw flexed. Not officially, but command wants eyes on the situation before escalation. You'll be support only, observe, report, assist extraction if necessary. Support only. Those words rarely meant what they sounded like. Minutes later they were in full gear, rifles checked, vehicles roaring to life. Sarah sat in the lead Humvee, eyes fixed on the horizon while the wind whipped dust through the open hatch. Marcus leaned forward from the back seat. You ever done anything like this before? Sarah didn't turn, not like this. The radio crackled with static. Convoy Alpha 3, do you copy? Nothing. Another burst of static. Attack East Ridge, repeat, then silence again. Rodriguez's voice came through the convoy channel. Maintain speed. Keep comms open. We'll regroup at grid 97. The drive stretched endless, the desert sun flattening everything into heat and distance. Then over the next ridge they saw its smoke, thick, black, rising in lazy spirals. The first truck was overturned, the second burned in place. Metal twisted, heat shimmered, no movement. Rodriguez's hand went up. Stop. Engines cut. The sudden silence screamed louder than any explosion. Sarah stepped out first. The air stung gunpowder, oil, blood, and sand. Eyes open, Rodriguez ordered. This wasn't an accident. They fanned out, rifles ready. Sarah moved toward the second vehicle, her boots crunching on shattered glass. Through the haze, she spotted drag marks, long, uneven, leading away from the road toward a cluster of broken stone. Sergeant, she called, tracks heading north, at least 4 people. Rodriguez joined her, crouched low. Hostiles. Unknown, but whoever they are, they moved fast. A faint metallic click cut through the wind, tiny, sharp, deliberate. Sarah froze. Wait. The explosion wasn't loud, it was close. A flash, a shockwave, the world tilting sideways. When the dust cleared, Rodriguez was down, conscious, bleeding from a cut above his brow. The blast had come from beneath the sand, a buried charge meant for anyone investigating the wreck. Ambush, Marcus shouted. Gunfire cracked from the rocks above, echoing, precise. Sarah dove behind a burnt truck, yanking Rodriguez into cover. The others scattered, Marcus and Jake laying suppressive fire, Lewis dragging the medic pack forward. Bullets punched through metal, sparks flying inches from Sarah's face. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm, controlled. Marcus, flank right. Jake, smoke out left. Lewis, get the sergeant stable. She moved between bursts of gunfire, low and fluid, reading the rhythm like music. When she spotted the first shooter, barely visible between 2 rocks, she exhaled, aimed, fired once. Silence. Another target popped up farther left. Marcus caught him with a short burst. Minutes blurred, fire, movement, shouts, the hiss of sand kicked by bullets. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence returned, broken only by the wind and the distant crackle of fire. Rodriguez groaned, propped against a tire. Status. All clear, Sarah answered. 3 hostiles down, 2 fled north. We're secure for now. He nodded weakly. Good work. She pressed gauze against the wound above his eye. You shouldn't talk. He managed a faint grin. You're giving me orders now. Someone has to. When the medevac arrived 20 minutes later, Rodriguez was stable but unconscious. Command ordered Group Alpha to hold position until retrieval. For a long time after the helicopter lifted away, none of them spoke. Lewis broke the silence. We just got hit, didn't we? Like really hit. Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, real world, no reset button. Sarah cleaned her weapon quietly, her hand steady even though her pulse was. Marcus looked at her. You saved his life again. She didn't respond, just stared out at the horizon where the last line of smoke faded into nothing. That night they camped near the wreckage. Command wanted a secure perimeter until investigation teams arrived. The desert turned cold fast. the kind of chill that crawls under armor. The fire they built barely touched it. Tommy poked at the flames. You think this was just some random attack? No, Sarah said. He glanced up. Then what? She hesitated. A message. From who? She looked toward the dark ridge. Someone who knows we're listening. They fell quiet again. Later, when the others slept, Sarah stayed awake, staring into the distance. Every instinct screamed that the day wasn't over. And she was right. At 200 hours, the radio came alive with a coded burst. A distress call, short, broken, desperate. It came from a small recon team 2 kilometers north. Marcus jolted awake. That's close. Sarah already had her rifle. Too close. Command's voice followed. All available units hold position. QRF en route. Repeat, hold position. Jake frowned. That's an order. Sarah's eyes didn't move from the horizon. By the time the QRF gets here, those soldiers will be dead. Marcus hesitated. So what do? She met his eyes. We move. There was no debate after that. They packed light and went silent. No headlights, no chatter, just the crunch of boots and the hiss of wind through the sand. When they reached the recon site, the smell hit first. Burnt fabric, gun oil, blood. 2 men down. One barely conscious, clutching his radio. Ambushed, he gasped. They took the others North Ridge. Sarah pressed his shoulder gently. You're safe now, stay still. She turned to the team. We're going after them. Jake swallowed. Command said. I know what they said. Her voice was low but firm. But we don't leave people behind. It wasn't bravado, it was conviction. They moved out in a staggered line, every sound amplified by tension. The moonlight was enough to navigate, their shadows long, shifting like ghosts. Half a kilometer out, Sarah raised her hand. Stop. Ahead, faint movement. Figures dragging 2 bound soldiers toward an old communications outpost. 5 hostiles, armed, confident. Marcus whispered, we're outnumbered. Sarah's eyes scanned the terrain. No, we're just underestimated. She outlined positions with hand signals. Marcus to high ground, Jake and Lewis covering the flank, Tommy watching rear. She crept forward alone, soundless as breath. When the first guard turned, she was already behind him. One precise strike, silent. His weapon caught mid-fall. She moved to the next. Marcus's suppressed rifle whispered once, another down. By the time the 5th man realized something was wrong, it was too late. Sarah cut the soldiers loose, whispering, quiet, follow me. They moved back through the rocks, slow and deliberate, but luck never lasts forever. A flare streaked into the sky, bright, blinding red. Gunfire erupted again. Sarah spun, dropping to a knee. The returning shots were faster, sharper now, panic replaced by precision. Move, she shouted, go. Marcus fired, covering bursts. Jake dragged one of the rescued soldiers. Lewis threw smoke grenades that bloomed white in the darkness. Through the chaos, Sarah covered the rear. Bullets sliced past her ear, sparks flying off stone. One caught her shoulder, a sharp, hot punch. She stumbled, grit biting into her palms, but she didn't stop. She turned, fired twice, and silence returned. Marcus reached her first. You're hit. It's clean. She winced but kept moving. When they finally reached the ridge line, the QRF convoy lights appeared in the distance, search beams cutting through dust. Safe. Alive. Barely. As medics loaded the rescued soldiers onto stretchers, an officer approached. Who authorized this movement? Sarah met his glare calmly. No one. Then you directly disobeyed command. Marcus stepped forward. We all did. Lewis added, she led us, but it was our choice. The officer looked ready to explode, but another voice cut in, steady, authoritative, female. Major Rodriguez. Stand down, Lieutenant, she said. I'll handle this. The younger officer hesitated, then walked off muttering. The major faced Sarah. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, ma'am. You also saved 2 soldiers who wouldn't be alive otherwise. Yes, ma'am. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind howled softly, carrying the faint smell of smoke. Finally, the major said quietly, "There's a difference between discipline and blind obedience. You seem to understand that better than most." Sarah's voice was low. "I did what my training demanded." The major's eyes softened. "No, you did what your conscience demanded, that's rarer." She turned to the rest of the team. "Get some rest, you've earned it." When the trucks rolled back toward base, dawn painted the horizon gold. The desert didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like a promise. In the back of the Humvee, Marcus glanced at Sarah's bandaged shoulder. "You ever gonna tell us how you stay so calm when everything goes to hell?" She smiled faintly. "You get used to it." "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "You're definitely not normal." The laughter that followed was tired but genuine. As the sun rose higher, Sarah looked out the window at the endless stretch of sand, vast, empty, alive. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were recruits, not heroes, but maybe that was the point. Maybe this was the real test all along. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The hum of the engine became her heartbeat, steady and certain. Her grandfather's voice returned, soft and proud. "Silence isn't weakness, little sparrow. It's the sound of control when the world loses it." She opened her eyes again, the horizon blazing ahead. Whatever came next, punishment, promotion, or both, didn't matter. She made her choice. She'd found her team. And for the first time, she wasn't just surviving training. She was living the purpose she'd been raised for. The summons came at dawn. No alarms, no shouting, just a knock. 2 military police officers waited outside the barracks, their silhouettes sharp against the cold morning light. "Recruit Sarah Chen," one of them said. "You're to report to the disciplinary board at 800 hours. Bring your service record." Inside the room, her teammates froze. Marcus sat up, half-dressed, disbelief already on his face. "What? After what she did out there?" Sarah didn't answer. She just buttoned her jacket, calm as ever. Jake stood. "This is garbage. We saved lives." Sarah's voice was quiet, steady. "We broke protocol." But Marcus began. She cut him off gently. "You don't have to defend me." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. When she walked out, Marcus swore under his breath, "This system's broken." Lewis tried to sound hopeful. "Maybe it's just procedure, they'll clear her." But no one believed it. The hearing room was sterile, polished wood, national flags, a faint hum of air conditioning that never stopped. 3 officers sat behind the long desk. Colonel Harrison in the center, his eyes tired but composed. To his left, Major Rodriguez from Special Operations Command. To his right, a judge advocate general officer with a face that could have been carved from stone. Sarah stood at attention before them, hands behind her back. The colonel began. "Recruit Chen, you are charged with disobeying a direct order during an active situation. Specifically, you led an unsanctioned operation to extract 2 missing soldiers against explicit command to hold position." "Yes, sir," she said simply. He studied her for a moment. "Do you deny this?" "No, sir." "Then explain it." Sarah took a breath, not hesitation, just precision. "Sir, when we received the distress signal, I calculated the QRF's response time. It would have exceeded the probable survival window for the hostages. We had proximity, capability, and cover advantage. I made a decision." The JAG officer's voice was sharp. "A decision that could have gotten your entire team killed." Sarah met his eyes. "Or saved lives, which it did." He frowned. "That's not the point." "No, sir, but it's the outcome." A long pause followed, the kind that stretches too far. forcing everyone in the room to confront what silence really means. Colonel Harrison leaned forward, elbows on the table. You understand, recruit, that the military doesn't function on personal judgment. Discipline, structure, and command integrity exist for a reason. I understand, sir. Then why did you disobey? Her answer came soft but unflinching. Because sometimes the difference between following orders and doing what's right is time, and I didn't have enough of it to ask permission. The colonel stared at her for a long time. Finally, Major Rodriguez spoke. Her tone wasn't angry, if anything, it carried reluctant admiration. Do you realize your actions have sparked internal debate across 3 divisions? Half the command wants to commend you. The other half wants to make an example out of you. Sarah didn't flinch. Both are probably right. A faint smile touched the major's lips before she hid it. Colonel Harrison exhaled slowly. The official report will note that you violated protocol during an active situation. That alone is grounds for disciplinary action. However, he glanced at the folder in front of him. The after-action review confirms your leadership directly resulted in saving 2 personnel, stabilizing the area and minimizing casualties. He closed the file, so here's the decision. The room seemed to tighten, everyone leaning slightly forward. You will receive a formal reprimand on your record, the colonel said. No suspension, no expulsion. But effective immediately, you are being transferred to a specialized training unit under Special Operations Command. Major Rodriguez will oversee your reassignment. Sarah blinked once. Transfer, sir. The major nodded. You'll complete your remaining recruit period attached to a field assessment group, advanced combat simulation, tactical leadership, moral decision training. It's not punishment. Consider it preparation. Colonel Harrison added quietly, think of it as both a consequence and an opportunity. Sarah's reply was simple, understood, sir. The colonel studied her another moment, something like regret softening his expression. You remind me of someone I once served with. He never asked permission to do the right thing either. He leaned back, dismissed. She saluted, turned, and walked out. Outside, the air was cold and bright. The base stretched wide and quiet, as if watching her. She didn't go back to the barracks right away. Instead, she walked to the training field, empty now, still scarred from past exercises. The ground carried the faint memory of gunpowder and effort. She stood there, staring at the horizon. Major Rodriguez joined her a few minutes later. You handled that well, the major said. I told the truth. Most people don't when they're staring down a tribunal. Sarah's gaze didn't move. Truth doesn't change just because someone's listening. Rodriguez smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's been taught more by silence than by speeches. Sarah's voice softened. My grandfather believed people talk too much when they're afraid. He said quiet is what courage sounds like before it becomes action. The major nodded slowly. He was right. They stood in silence for a while, the wind pushing dust across the field. Finally, the major said, your team won't take this well, but they'll understand eventually. You're not being punished, Chen, you're being tested. Sarah turned to her, and if I fail, then you'll learn, which is more than most ever do. The major's expression softened. Pack your gear. You leave at 500 tomorrow. Transport will take you to Fort Delaney for assessment. It's different there. How different? The major hesitated. It's where they find out what kind of soldier you really are. Then she walked away, leaving Sarah alone with the horizon. When Sarah returned to the barracks, the team was waiting. The silence when she entered said it all they'd heard. Marcus stood first. They're transferring you. Yes. Because of what happened. Partly. Lewis frowned. That's not fair. Jake crossed his arms. They should have given you a medal. Sarah met his eyes. I don't need one. Marcus took a step closer. You saved lives, Sarah. You saved us. Doesn't that count for anything? Her reply was calm, but there was a faint tremor beneath it. It does, but rules matter too, and someone has to pay for the break. Lewis shook his head. This isn't right. Sarah looked at them, really looked. Listen, what we did out there was risky. Brave, yes, but we got lucky. If one thing had gone wrong, we'd be dead, or worse, others would be because of us. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The fact that we lived doesn't mean we were right. It means we have more to learn. The room fell quiet. Then Marcus muttered, "Still feels like they're taking you from us." Sarah smiled faintly. "You can't lose something that isn't yours to keep. I'll still be here, just not here." Jake extended a hand. "You taught us more in 2 months than anyone else ever did." She shook it. "You taught me what a team feels like." When she left that night, none of them slept. The convoy waited at dawn. Pale light spilled across the base, painting long shadows on the tarmac. Sarah loaded her duffel into the transport truck, her movements deliberate, quiet. Marcus appeared beside her, out of breath from running. "I wasn't letting you leave without saying goodbye." She turned, one eyebrow raised. "You really ran here in slippers." He glanced down. "Worth it." She smiled, a real one this time. "You'll be fine," she said. "Not without you." "Then don't try to be me, be better." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. As she climbed into the truck, he called out, "You ever think you'll come back?" She paused, hand on the doorframe. "If I do, I hope it's because I learned something worth bringing home." The door shut. Engines rumbled. The truck rolled forward, kicking up dust that swallowed the sunrise. Through the window, Sarah watched the base fade, the barracks, the training fields, the people who'd become her first real family since she lost her last one. She didn't cry, she didn't look away. Her reflection in the glass stared back, calm, focused, uncertain. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't an ending. It was a crossing. The kind her grandfather used to talk about. Every soldier faces 2 battles, little sparrow. One outside, one inside. Win the wrong one first and you'll lose both. The road stretched endlessly ahead, sand and light merging into horizon. Sarah leaned back, eyes on the distance, the hum of the engine blending with her heartbeat. She didn't know what waited at Fort Delaney. But she knew what she carried with her: silence, resolve, and a purpose that still scared her sometimes. And that was enough. Sometimes, discipline isn't about obeying orders. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to. Under the next pale sunrise, Sarah's truck rolled through Fort Delaney's gates. The new base didn't look like anywhere she'd trained before. No cheering recruits, no open drills, just high fencing and silence broken by the low thrum of generators. A painted sign at the entrance read, "Field Assessment Division. Observe. Adapt. Endure." She stepped out, boots meeting unfamiliar gravel. The air smelled of oil and pine. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. 2 instructors waited, Major Vega, whose calm seemed carved from stone, and Sergeant Hale, lean, sun-creased, eyes that measured rather than greeted. Vega nodded. "Recruit Chen, you're early, good." Sarah set her duffel down. "I don't like wasting hours I can use." "Then you'll fit," Vega said. "This unit doesn't train soldiers, it unmasks them." Hale motioned her toward the barracks. Inside, bunks were half empty, walls bare. The few occupants didn't speak. They watched. Veterans, not recruits, faces etched by more miles than years. Sarah felt it immediately. This wasn't a school. It was a filter. That night, lights cut at 2000. She lay awake, heartbeat sinking with the faint ticking of the base clock. She thought of Group Alpha, of Marcus's laughter, of Rodriguez bleeding in the sand, of the reprimand that had carried her here. Then, the whisper of her grandfather's voice. "Growth hurts most when you're finally doing it right." Reveille at 4:30. Cold water, no breakfast, straight to the field. They ran obstacle courses laced with noise simulations, flashbangs, shouted false commands. The goal wasn't speed, it was composure. Hale walked among them, quiet as a ghost, marking every flinch, every glance. When the whistle ended, half the group stood gasping. Sarah knelt, breathing slow, eyes closed. Hale stopped beside her. "Why shut your eyes?" "To remember where I am," she said. He nodded once. "Good answer, most forget." By midday, they shifted to the range, dynamic drills under constant distraction. Alarms, recorded screams, random detonations. Vega called it cognitive chaos. Sarah called it Tuesday. She moved through it steady, deliberate, shots grouping tight even as others missed wide. But the real test began after dark. They were loaded into transport trucks, hoods over their heads, driven for an hour through winding roads. When the hoods came off, they were in dense woodland lit only by moonlight. Vega's voice crackled through a handheld speaker. "You've been dropped in simulated hostile territory. No maps, no comms. Extract a beacon before sunrise. Work together or fail alone." Then the trucks vanished. Sarah adjusted her pack, scanning faces around her, 4 other trainees. None spoke. The silence wasn't fear this time, it was calculation. A man to her left finally muttered, "Name's Porter, you lead." She shook her head. "We lead ourselves, stay low." They moved through brush and shadow. Twigs cracked. Somewhere in the dark, a mechanical whine drones. Red lights swept the trees. Sarah froze, down. They dropped seconds before the beams crossed overhead. When the lights passed, she whispered, "Pattern's 20-second rotation. We move on 15. Porter blinked. "You counting that in your head?" She didn't answer. They advanced, crawling through mud over roots slick with frost. One trainee panicked, bolting toward a clearing. Immediately, the sky flared white. A loudspeaker boomed. "Traitor located." Alarms shrieked. Simulation mines popped in rapid bursts. The trainee's vest lit red. Porter swore, "They'll zero in on us next." Sarah pointed toward a shallow creek. "Water muffles heat. Move." They waded chest deep, cold, biting skin, breath fogging. Each step sent ripples through the silver surface. The forest seemed to breathe with them. An hour later, they found the beacon, an old radio tower blinking faint blue atop a ridge. Problem: 2 automated turrets scanned the base perimeter. Porter whispered, "We can't take that." Sarah studied the rhythm, left, right, pause. She counted under her breath. "We can," on the pause. They moved as one, sprinting through the blind gap. Porter reached the control box, yanked the power cable. The lights died. Silence. Then Vega's voice filled the forest again. "Team Delta, extraction complete. Time, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Only successful group tonight." A flare burst above them, white against black sky. Sarah blinked up at it, heart still pounding. Porter looked over. "How'd you see all that timing stuff in the dark?" "My grandfather used to train me blindfolded," she said. "He said if you learn rhythm, you can survive anything." Porter gave a low whistle. "Remind me never to bet against rhythm." Back at Fort Delaney, Vega studied the data feed. "Your pulse barely spiked through that op," she said. "That's not normal." Sarah stood still. "Control isn't calm, ma'am, it's focus." Vega regarded her a moment, then nodded. "You're learning faster than most, but control has a cost. Let's see if you can afford it." The next test came unannounced. At 200, alarms screamed. Trainees stumbled out of bunks half-dressed. Smoke filled the hallway, artificial, acrid. Orders barked through speakers. "Base under attack. Evacuate civilians." But there were no civilians, only staged chaos. Sarah moved through the fog, guiding disoriented trainees toward exits. One froze, coughing, eyes wild. She grabbed his collar, shouted, "Look at me." He did. "Breathe," she said. "You're alive, move." When the lights finally cut back to normal, Vega stood in the corridor, clipboard in hand. "That wasn't about speed," she said. It was about empathy under confusion. You passed. Sarah blinked. Empathy. Vega's gaze softened. The hardest skill to keep when bullets fly. Weeks blurred into patterns of exhaustion and insight. Sarah learned advanced field tactics, crisis negotiation, language drills, restraint holds. But the real lessons came between training sessions, quiet debriefs, long silences in which instructors said little and expected more. She found herself writing in a small notebook at night, phrases, thoughts, fragments of things she hadn't said out loud. Control without compassion becomes cruelty. Leadership without listening is noise. Silence can comfort or conceal. Sometimes she caught herself wondering what Marcus and the others were doing back at base, whether they were still training, still arguing about who ran faster, whether they missed her or had already moved on. The not knowing stung more than she expected. Then came the psychological evaluation. She sat in a plain room across from a civilian doctor, gray hair, patient smile, a recorder blinking red on the desk. "Recruit Chen," he began softly, "you've been described as calm to the point of unnerving. Do you ever feel fear?" "Yes," she said. "When?" "When I forget why I'm here." He nodded slowly. "And why are you here?" She hesitated. "Because I want to prove silence doesn't mean weakness." The doctor smiled faintly. "Silence can be strength, yes, but it can also be armor. What are you hiding behind yours?" Sarah looked away. "Nothing." "Nothing," he repeated, writing something down. "Or everything." She didn't answer. The clock ticked louder. Afterward, she sat outside on the steps, wind tugging at her sleeves, unsure whether she'd passed or failed, or if that even mattered. A week later, Vega gathered the trainees at the range. "Final assessment," she said. "Two-part exercise, precision under duress and decision under moral constraint." They exchanged puzzled looks. The first stage was physical, complex movement, rapid-fire drills, endurance circuits. Sarah excelled. Her body knew what to do. The second stage was different. A simulated hostage crisis projected onto VR screens. Each trainee commanded a team in a virtual mission where every choice carried consequence. Civilians in danger, conflicting orders, incomplete intel. Vega's voice guided them. "You have 10 minutes. Decide who you save." Sarah's scenario unfolded fast. 2 civilians, 1 wounded soldier, limited time. She ordered the civilians extracted first, defying the directive to prioritize military personnel. Her virtual commander reprimanded her. She ignored him. When the simulation ended, Vega approached quietly. "You disobeyed the directive again." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because the civilians couldn't defend themselves. The soldier could." Vega watched her a long moment, then said softly, "And yet again you were right." She handed Sarah a folder. Inside was a single sheet marked Preselection Clearance, Special Operations Candidate. Sarah stared at it, unsure whether it was reward or warning. Vega said, "You'll have time to think before deciding. This isn't glory, it's burden. Say yes and you'll never be invisible again." Sarah closed the folder. "I'll think." That night rain fell, rare for the region, heavy enough to drown the usual hum of generators. Sarah stood under the overhang outside the barracks, the water's rhythm steady against the metal roof. For the first time in months, she let herself stop moving. Porter joined her quietly. "So, you going to take it?" She didn't look at him. "I don't know." He nodded toward the rain. "My old co used to say, we don't choose the moments that define us. We just choose whether to meet them." Sarah smiled faintly. "Smart co." "Died young," Porter said. "Guess that's the cost of meeting them." They stood there a while longer, 2 silhouettes framed by gray water. When he left, Sarah opened her notebook again. The ink blurred slightly in the damp air. She wrote one line. "Sometimes silence isn't about hiding. It's about listening long enough to know which voices deserve to be heard. She closed the book, exhaled slowly, and watched the rain dissolve into mist. Tomorrow she would decide. Morning arrived without a bugle, only the slow gray light that seeps through rain-soaked windows. Fort Delaney looked softer under clouds, less like a crucible, more like the memory of one. Sarah lay awake before the alarm. The thin bunk creaked when she sat up. Beside it lay the folder Vega had given her the night before pre-selection clearance. One signature would send her down a path her grandfather had once walked, a path that rarely let people come back whole. She ran a thumb over the embossed seal, then set it aside. The paper felt heavier than it looked. Outside, the base moved in quiet efficiency. Engines idled, boots struck gravel, voices carried low. Everything worked because everyone obeyed. She wondered if she could live like that forever, obeying when her heart was built to question. Major Vega found her at breakfast. No preamble, decision. Sarah shook her head, not yet. Vega's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in understanding. Every soldier hesitates before the step that changes them. Just don't mistake reflection for fear. Sarah stirred her coffee. What if it's both? Then use one to understand the other, Vega said. Briefing room at 10:00. Whether you sign or not, they'll want to hear you. The briefing room was full when Sarah entered, instructors, analysts, a handful of officers she didn't recognize. Screens along the wall displayed footage from her months of training, the desert ambush, the forest extraction, the hostage simulation. Each clip frozen on her face mid-action, silent proof of every choice she'd made. Vega stood at the head of the table. Recruit Chen has completed all phases of field assessment, she said. Final determination will depend on whether she accepts candidacy. An older colonel leaned forward. You've proven instinct, discipline, empathy. But special operations isn't about glory, it's about carrying decisions no one thanks you for. Why should we believe you understand that? Sarah met his gaze. Because I already live it. He frowned. Explain. Every time I disobeyed an order, I accepted the weight of being wrong. Every time I was right, I carried the cost of being alone. Either way, it's a debt I pay in silence. The colonel regarded her a long moment, then leaned back. And yet you hesitate. Yes, sir. Why? She looked around the room, at the faces waiting for certainty. Because I don't want to become someone who stops asking why. The words hung there, soft but unshakable. Vega broke the silence. Then you already understand the job. The colonel gave a short nod. Offer stands, decide by sundown. Sarah spent the afternoon alone on the North Range. The sky cleared slowly, leaving the earth slick and shining. She walked the perimeter, boots sinking slightly into wet soil, until she reached the far fence where pine met wire. Beyond it stretched hills and distance, the kind of horizon that always looked like freedom until you tried to reach it. She sat on a weathered supply crate and pulled her notebook from her pocket. The pages smelled faintly of rain and gun oil. She flipped through the entries, notes from training, fragments of thought, bits of her grandfather's advice. One line near the beginning caught her eye. Silence can protect, or it can imprison. She closed the book. Maybe this choice wasn't about rank or recognition. Maybe it was about deciding what her silence would stand for from now on. Footsteps crunched behind her. Porter approached, hands in his jacket pockets. Vega said you'd be out here thinking. Apparently I do that too much. He smiled. Thinking's dangerous, that's why most of us avoid it. They stood quietly for a moment, the breeze carrying the smell of pine resin and damp earth. He finally asked, you going to sign? I want to, she said. But wanting isn't enough. Every time I follow an order, I hear my grandfather asking if I remember who I'm serving, the system or the people. Porter nodded slowly. Maybe the system is the people if the right ones end up inside it. That made her laugh, soft and short. That's the first hopeful thing I've heard all week. He shrugged. You've earned hope. At dusk, the compound gathered near the flagpole for end-of-cycle assembly. The light fell gold across their uniforms, turning the wet ground into mirrors. Vega called Sarah forward. The folder waited on the table beside her. Recruit Chen, Vega said formally, your assessment is complete. You may accept or decline selection into special operations training. Either path will be honored. Sarah looked at the folder, then at the people watching, the instructors, the trainees, the quiet figures from headquarters. She thought of Marcus and Group Alpha, of the convoy smoke rising in the desert, of every face that had looked to her before knowing if she was right. She reached for the pen and paused. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady. Ma'am, I'm not signing. A ripple moved through the crowd, surprise, disbelief, maybe even respect. Vega's eyebrows lifted slightly, declining. Yes, ma'am. Explain. Sarah took a breath. You taught me control, you taught me leadership, but what I came here to learn was service. If I go into special ops now, I'll spend my life in the dark fighting shadows. Maybe someday that'll be the right fight, but right now, the people who need me are still learning how to stand. She looked out at the trainees. I can teach them that. Vega studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. You realize most would kill for that offer. I know, Sarah said softly. That's why someone has to prove it's not the only way to matter. The major turned to the colonel. He gave a faint smile. So noted. Vega faced Sarah again. Then finish your service where you started. Group Alpha's still training at Base 7. They'll need an instructor. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something loosen inside her chest. Yes, ma'am. 2 weeks later, a transport dropped her back where it all began. The same dry wind, the same clang of metal doors, the same field where she'd first stood alone while everyone laughed. Only now, the laughter was welcome. Group Alpha spotted her before she reached the barracks. Marcus ran ahead, disbelief turning into a grin so wide it nearly broke his face. No way, they actually sent you back. She smiled. Apparently they thought you needed supervision. Lewis whooped, we're doomed. Rodriguez appeared from the office doorway, bandage long gone but the scar still fresh above his brow. He saluted. Welcome home, Chen. She returned it. Good to be home, sir. He motioned toward the team. They've been impossible since you left. Thought maybe you'd rub off on them again. Sarah laughed quietly. They'll be fine. They already know what matters. That night, as stars settled over the desert, she sat on the same step outside the barracks where she once cleaned her rifle in silence. Marcus joined her, handing over a dented canteen. Never thought I'd see you back here, he said. Neither did I. So what now? You gonna train us till we all turn into quiet legends? She smiled. No, I'm going to make sure none of you ever forget why you started. They sat there a while, words unnecessary. The night hummed with distant engines, the base breathing around them like a living thing. Marcus broke the silence again, voice softer. You could have had the world, Sarah. Why stay here? She looked out at the horizon, the same horizon that had once promised escape and now simply felt like belonging. Because the world doesn't need another ghost it can't see. It needs people who remember what the fight is for. He nodded slowly. Guess that's you then. Maybe, she said, or maybe it's all of us. At 2300, the lights went out across the base. Sarah remained on the steps, eyes tracing the stars. She thought of her grandfather again, of oil-stained hands, steady voice, lessons whispered over years. Strength isn't how loud you roar, little sparrow. It's how quietly you rebuild what others broke. A breeze carried sand across the training field, erasing footprints from the day. The sound reminded her of applause, faint, endless. She rose, brushed dust from her uniform, and whispered to the wind, I'm listening. The stars didn't answer, but somehow she felt heard. Weeks later, Recruits whispered new stories about a woman who barely spoke during drills but could see every mistake before it happened, about how she never raised her voice, yet everyone followed when she moved, about how once 6 Marines had laughed at her and never laughed again. Most didn't know her name, the veterans did. They just called her the quiet one who acted. And if you stood close enough during dawn muster, you could hear the rhythm of her breath as the whistle blew, calm, certain, alive. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stands. And when the world finally listens, it changes.